What happens when a school leader wants to support civil discourse in their building, but isn't sure where to start? What goes into designing resources that help administrators foster viewpoint diversity while supporting their teachers? And what can we learn from understanding how these tools are created? Welcome to the Teacher Sphere, where we amplify the voices of practicing educators and administrators who support civil discourse in today's schools. I'm Kobi Nelson, and today I'm speaking with Sarah Lane, a member of our team at Sphere Education Initiatives, who developed our leadership toolkit for civil discourse. Sarah is going to take us inside the creation process and share insights about what this work really looks like when it moves from concept to classroom implementation. Get ready for some honest, thoughtful conversation about facilitating civil discourse and building trust in schools. All right, I'm sitting here today with Sarah Lane, the engagement specialist with Sphere Education Initiatives, and she has developed a leadership toolkit that we would like to know more about. So, Sarah, welcome. Can you please tell us about your role and your background in education and what led you to develop these civil discourse tools for leaders?
Thanks for having me. In my role, I support our professional development in schools across the country and engagement with our alumni. Prior to being with Sphere, I was a teacher, then instructional facilitator, similar to a coach, and in this role got my principal certification and supported administrative teams. In my work in K-12 and from engaging with many amazing educators across the U.S. with Sphere, I saw a need to equip varying levels of leadership and education with tools to advance civil discourse with the educators they partner with.
That's excellent. What was specifically the educational landscape or the challenges you observed that inspired this?
Great question. So both opportunities and challenges inspired the toolkit. Leaders in schools and districts are in unique positions to be able to support educators and implement practices that will elevate student voices through civil discourse. So adaptive leadership, whether it be teacher mentors or principals, they're helping build confidence and meet the needs of teachers. This leads to increased academic performance and teacher retention, and in the context of fostering civil discourse, helps develop civic culture in our schools and communities. Those are the opportunities, but at the same time, there were challenges, like teachers often cite feeling like they might not have support from leadership in implementing civil discourse. We're seeing self-censorship or teachers anxious in supporting student discourse because of fear of pushback from administrators or real or perceived restrictions, challenges with students, and more. So many of these barriers can be overcome or addressed by leadership that fosters trusting relationships and equips teachers to dive into civil discourse. This toolkit aims to really support that work.
That's fantastic. We're very excited about this toolkit. And I'm wondering, Sarah, before developing these resources, what gaps did you see in your role in schools and how they were approaching civil discourse and viewpoint diversity?
I'll share a couple standout gaps because I feel like there's so many. So I'll focus on two. But the first gap is really common, and that's in educator support and training. So educators are often lacking the professional development opportunities or resources to develop the confidence needed to facilitate student discourse. Educators need quality PD and those resources, and most importantly, channeling these are the leaders who advocate for them and support them. And one barrier I will say with that is cost, and Sphere covers that in providing our resources, which we can get into. But the second gap is educators and leaders seeing civil discourse as limited. So I often think that sometimes people think, civil discourse or viewpoint diversity are often confined to social studies or English language arts topics. And even then, it might be associated with specific academic tasks. But instead, civil discourse can be seen and supported as a school-wide practice across all subject areas. So thinking through how respectful discourse and critical thinking thinking are for STEM, the arts, even playing a role in peer conversations in the cafeteria. Civil discourse really can be embedded into a school's mission and vision across the board. So in developing these resources, I was thinking through what do leaders need to navigate these gaps to provide those resources and see civil discourse as something that ties across an entire school mission.
I think that's fantastic. And I really appreciate the fact that you have identified the need for materials specifically addressing civil discourse from a leadership perspective, rather than just classroom resources. I'm wondering if you can walk me through how you identified that need.
Yeah, so I first kind of thought through how leaders have a different vantage point. So they're seeing the bigger picture of a department level or a school or a district and are positioned to drive innovation and foster a civic-minded culture across the school or community. And leaders often rely on tools like checklists, goal setting frameworks, observation templates to provide that type of strategic support from above and feedback in partnership with educators. So, in my role as an instructional facilitator, one of my favorite tools was a simple one-pager I used during observations. I could quickly circle key noticings, jot down action items, making feedback efficient and clear on both sides. And when mentoring first-year teachers, I used a goal-setting template to identify needs with the teacher and outline concrete next steps together. And these tools were effective because they were simple, practical, designed for meaningful collaboration. So I realized that while we at Sphere had amazing resources available for classroom instruction, we lacked a few similarly practical tools for leaders to guide and support educators in the realm of civil discourse. So in leadership roles, whether it be as a mentor, department chair, coach, principal, having clear, actionable steps laid out on a timeline can help advance a larger goal or mission. So that's a bit about the gap that I designed specifically for the Sphere team.
Sarah, I'm wondering what tensions do you or did you have to navigate when designing resources that encourage open dialogue while respecting different school communities' contexts and concerns?
Yeah, so one of the biggest tensions I navigated was balancing the need for open discourse with the reality that every school community has its own comfort levels, norms, and concerns. We work with leaders in school communities with Sphere across the United States, and each one is bringing its own unique needs and strengths and perspectives. Everyone's kind of at that different spot in their civil discourse journey. So, having taught in a few states myself, I've seen firsthand how practices have to shift based on the foundational skills present, the community priorities, and kind of those varying needs around the accessibility even to diverse viewpoints. So, because of that, tried to balance that tension with also the ability to be flexible and adaptable. So tools that support critical thinking and these respectful discussions, but without prescribing one right way. So we did bring in some leaders from our Sphere network to provide feedback, which helped ensure the tools were relevant and usable across different settings and geographic areas.
So, when working with those particular leaders and when you first began drafting and creating these, what did you identify as the core skills that school leaders would need to successfully implement and support civil discourse and viewpoint diversity among the teachers and students that they're serving?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think about how leaders are needing so many skills in so many contexts. So I think with these specific resources, I tried to really focus in on the fact that leaders would need strong skills in facilitation, empathy, and also adaptability to successfully support civil discourse and viewpoint diversity. Adaptability particularly stands out to me since it's that ability to adjust strategies, approaches, and communication styles in response to changing circumstances and needs of a community. So some strategies and tools will work really well for your staff and some won't. So you'll have to adjust and adapt accordingly. And one year, one tool might be perfect for a situation, and then the next year you've completely redone a part based on where your school is. So good news there is that several of the tools in the toolkit are all downloadable and editable, so you can adjust as needed. But also, I'd like to point out that leaders are needing that ability to model respectful dialogue, guide reflection, and create safe spaces for this open communication. Along with, I always recommend aligning civil discourse to the school's values and goals to develop a culture where that's kind of embedded into the work that you're already doing.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate how the materials that you've created are adaptable for varying communities and schools and educational contexts. One thing that I think is really great about the materials is that you emphasize the separation of civil discourse support from formal evaluation. And I'm wondering, why did you make this distinction, and why do you think that it will best serve leaders and teachers?
Great question. That's really important to pull out and to think about with this toolkit. I was intentional about separating civil discourse from that formal evaluation because the goal is to create a space where growth and reflection and experimentation can thrive. Civil discourse requires vulnerability from both teachers and students, and when it's tied too closely to evaluation, it's going to feel risky to try strategies or navigate complex conversations. It might shut down that vulnerability piece. So by making the distinction, I'm really trying to signal that this work is about partnership and not performance, to allow leaders to show up as thought partners and coaches rather than evaluators in all these spaces. So really trying to create a safer space for teachers to build their practice and focus on meaningful, sustainable growth rather than compliance. So it can then be up to an educator if they would like to more deeply tie civil discourse to a formal goal or evaluation practices. For example, as an educator, I did do a discourse goal because it aligned closely to a student ownership goal I had. However, that was my own personal choice in selecting that as a goal.
So what I hear you saying is that these tools help leaders develop trust with educators. And trust is a very important piece of this whole process. And I'm wondering in particular, what is it that helped you come to this conclusion that trust needed to be developed? And how did you do that in these materials?
I'm glad you mentioned this because the element of trust is critical for a school to move forward in its mission and vision, and that relationship between a leader and a teacher are important. And that even includes, as I mentioned previously, like a mentor teacher to a first-year teacher. There's a ton of trust that has to go into that relationship, and along with vulnerability. So pulling in a couple statistics to that, because I think it highlights how trust is important, is in a RAND Corporation study that they do on the state of the teacher. It showed that around 65% of teachers self-censor discussions on political and social issues. And in the same survey, 25% of teachers said they had leaders who had directed them to limit these discussions. So often there are barriers, whether they're real or perceived, and in combination with teachers that might not have the tools or feel confident to facilitate student discussions, that can lead to a somewhat dismal reference point of less discussions and increased limitations. But when we're seeing an investment in building these trusting relationships, a space to experiment and build in complexity, I think that's really important to helping to, as I say, positively impact some of those statistics that we're seeing.
I love that, that positively impacting the statistics we're seeing. In that spirit and in the spirit of some vulnerability, I'm wondering if you could describe a moment when you had to completely rethink or reconsider a part of the suite of materials during the development process. What wasn't working and how did you adapt?
Yeah, great question. As I started to create these, I thought about how maybe I'm making a few things too rigid. And again, that goes back to really wanting to see these as partnership pieces rather than formal evaluation. So while I think my intentions were solid, the language and structure needed to feel more flexible and approachable. And so I went back and simplified categories and aligned them more clearly with Sphere's AWARE framework. And that was made it an easy transition to add some real life look-fors that reflected both strong practice and emerging efforts. So wanted this to feel like a tool that can be used along the way for anyone across their journey and be flexible and accommodating.
That's excellent. I'm wondering, Sarah, how do you envision school leaders implementing these tools in their schools?
Yeah, so it was really important to create tools that could integrate into already existing workflows because we know how full the plates are of administrators, leaders, mentors that are taking on extra responsibilities. And drowning in to-do lists is never preferable. So having been in those roles myself, I understand things can feel like one more thing. And if that's the case, it's not going to be used. So I wanted the toolkit to feel practical and doable and not overwhelming. So the tools are designed to align with what leaders are probably and usually already doing, like classroom observations, quick walkthroughs, coaching cycles, department instructional work, goal setting, etc. So by embedding civil discourse into familiar routines, we make it easier to sustain and scale that growth without asking leaders to reinvent the wheel. So it allows for gradual growth where milestones can be met along the way to a larger goal.
That's fantastic. And that really speaks to the adaptability I think that we hope in all of Sphere's content is that teachers and leaders will be able to take the content and adapt it to the needs of their classroom, their educational context. When you imagine the resources that you've created being used in schools, this is a two-part question. What kind of impact do you hope that they'll have on teachers, first of all, and then secondly, on students?
Yeah, I like how you're differentiating that because there's so many overlaps, but there are clear categories and it's kind of this nice symbiosis, I hope that the resources empower teachers to feel more confident in facilitating meaningful, respectful discourse in their classrooms. And my hope is that this is stemming from seeing that leadership at all levels are supporting them and equipping them for civil discourse. So having those tools and having that, advocacy and the leadership should help in that confidence. And for students, I envision a learning environment where they're feeling heard and challenged and equipped with the skills to engage with diverse perspectives in thoughtful and constructive ways. And I view these skills as critical to the future of our civic culture and a healthy democracy. So those things working together can lead to that for us.
What role does trust play in developing the confidence of students and teachers?
So, yeah, I think that a key element of trust in that is that, one, having the trust to have leaders coming into your space and being a partner in these spaces. Our classrooms feel like our spaces, right? And to be open to having that, it is building trust. And when we're having these complex conversations in our classrooms, again, we're needing the support of the leaders in that space to listen and reflect and grow alongside us. And that does take a trusting relationship.
100%. I think that just as you outlined, trust is absolutely key to this. And your toolkit offers strategies or ways to build this trust. And in particular, it offers strategies for beginning with small-scale activities. And I'm wondering if you can describe what some of those small-scale activities are and tell us why you believe starting small is so critical to the work of leaders.
Yeah, that starting small piece is really important because it's setting the stage for gradual growth and allowing staff to build confidence and that trust as they're advancing together to continue progress. So civil discourse skills, just like any other practice or skill, is going to take time to develop. So those small scale activities are going to help provide that opportunity to develop and grow without overwhelming staff. So for example, we say, and this is reflected in the toolkit, that leaders wouldn't benefit from telling teachers to dive straight into challenging political or social topics, nor should they. So it's essential to begin with more accessible, lighter discussions that help ease students and educators into the process. So, for example, supporting teachers and using tools like fun discussion starters from our middle school toolkit, such as whether a hot dog is a sandwich, to help develop that engagement and create a comfortable entry point. And it's the same with the walkthrough tools and the checklist. Those are just to start setting goals. And there's stages across the roadmap for leaders in the toolkit that include emerging, expanding, and empowering. And that just kind of shows that natural progression where you can check off things that you're already doing, because I'm sure that a lot of people listening have already started some of these practices, and see where it makes sense to start taking grab-and-go items to use as, let's say, a department chair could just pick up the peer walkthrough tool and do that on their staff. Or you could take a PD video from the toolkit and use it in a PLC to spark conversation. So really starting with a small piece and trying it out to get the conversation going.
Just for the record, Sarah, do you think that a hot dog is a sandwich?
That's a great question. I'm going to have to say no. It seems like it has to be its own unique category.
Even with the meat, and then you got, in the middle, and then you got the sides that are a sandwich. I know.
You can't put lettuce on it. That's my thing.
That's true.
Relish doesn't count.
Oh, relish doesn't count. Yeah, I suppose. I was going to say maybe in Chicago.
That's true. And then we're getting into peanut butter and jelly.
There you go.
That you wouldn't put lettuce on either.
Right.
So the jury's still out on that one.
What I hear you saying about these tools is that they offer a lot of opportunities for conversation and connection. And instead of being an evaluative type of tool, they're really building those skills so that teachers and leaders can connect more. And specifically, these tools are adaptable to different types of educational leaders, from principals to instructional coaches to department chairs. And I'm wondering if you could outline, how do you envision each of these leaders using the tools? What might be some ways that these tools could be differentiated or adapted for leaders in those specific positions?
Yeah, great question. I shared a few examples, but to kind of expand on that a little bit, is each type of educational leader can leverage the toolkit in ways that are aligning with their specific role. And I view a lot of the tools as being used across these roles. But for some examples, for principals or district leadership, the toolkit can serve as a framework to establish school or district-wide goals and initiatives to create a shared vision or direction for an entire community. So they could use the roadmap and goal-setting template to track progress, see where civil discourse is being integrated and advanced across schools. The PD videos and discussion guides and other pieces could be provided to PLCs or even used in short staff meetings and those roles as well. But I'm also thinking a lot about our instructional coaches, teacher mentors that could use these resources with beginning or pre-service teachers to, let's say, offer targeted support. So they could use a walkthrough tool or quick rubric to provide specific actionable feedback, and alongside reflection tools to have meaningful conversations about progress and areas for growth. Finally, I want to give a shout out to our many department chairs that take on these volunteer or small stipend roles. And I think you could utilize toolkit pieces to enhance collaboration within your department or subject areas too. So focusing on smaller scale or department specific strategies for integrating civil discourse into content, like using a walkthrough tool to do a peer walkthrough and share strategies for discourse in their specific subject area. Those are just a few ideas.
Those are excellent ideas. And I think, what you're bringing to bear by talking about particularly department chairs is the relationship between civil discourse and academic achievement. And sometimes I think we tend to silo those into two different categories. We have academic achievement over here, and then we have civil discourse. But I'm curious, could you expand on the relationship between civil discourse and academic achievement? And why in particular is that relationship and connection important for school leaders to understand?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I like to really highlight how one thing that I like to do is I love to pull up state standards across all subject areas. And I have not yet found a state where discourse or discussion or dialogue strategies aren't emphasized or embedded in some form. And that's across all subject areas. I can point out in science and math where there is discussion and dialogue around problem solving. So anyway, they're widely recognized, let's say those discourse skills, as essential in academic content standards, but they're sometimes put aside. And I like to pull up that sometimes we think through meaningful discourse. When we're engaging students in those processes, they're also engaging in critical thinking, active listening, reasoning with evidence, articulating ideas. So when students are learning and practicing these skills, they're not just learning how to communicate. They're learning how to do those academic skills like analyzing texts, questioning assumptions, etc. These are the same skills that help them excel in writing, discussion-based assessments, or problem solving. And so I think it's really important to highlight that civil discourse is a priority embedded across our subject areas and not just an extra or an add-on. So when leaders see civil discourse as a driver of not only civic readiness and culture and community and kind of some of those social emotional skills, but also academic growth, it makes it a lot easier to easily integrate them into school-wide goals and instructional priorities.
I love thinking about what you just said because as a former English teacher, having the specific speaking and listening standards, that I was supposed to meet, it was challenging sometimes to see those visible because there was so much emphasis put on reading and writing. And I'm wondering, what do you think, Sarah, about speaking and listening playing a role in confidence building, maybe particularly with its relationship to critical thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point because I often think those speaking and listening standards, at least in my experience, they're not on the report card.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, well, do we spend much time with that? I don't know. But exactly what you brought up, it's that embedded confidence to engage with academic content. And so much of our learning is tied to what we're able to listen to and speak about. And I think kudos to our many sphere resources, there are great ways to support students at all levels of communication skills, supporting our students that are multilingual learners or students that are shy or anxious about engaging. So it's important to think about that because as I continue to go on about how important civil discourse is, we have to also realize it can be really challenging for our students. And so when we're investing in those skill developments, it's really supporting those students with their academic capabilities and confidence and understanding the content, but it's also helping them long term with their citizenship skills too.
100%. I agree with you, and I think that they're absolutely vital. And this day and age, we really need to spend more time specifically teaching students how to communicate with each other verbally and how to listen to one another.
And I'm wondering, Kobi, like on your end, when you've had evaluators or administrators or leaders come into your classroom, have you felt like you've had to, in the past as an educator, explain why you're having students in discussion so much? Maybe they think it's a distraction to the real academic skills.
Yes, sometimes I have had that happen. I definitely have had experiences where speaking and listening hasn't necessarily been encouraged specifically by leaders. And the speaking that has gone on in classroom is kind of seen as like fluff or just kind of like an intro activity, as opposed to really developing those rhetorical communication skills that are needed for kids to be able to talk to each other civilly and also talk to adults and be able to engage in school culture in a way that is constructive. So yes, I've definitely had that happen. And I love the tools that you're creating because I think that they're specifically focusing on leaders being able to identify speaking and listening as more than just these kind of like fluff things that teachers are doing to kind of get kids interested in the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that, you provide really specific observation frameworks within your tools, and I'm wondering why you created them And how do you hope that they'll inform the feedback process? And again, how does that play into the trust that's being developed between leaders and teachers?
Yeah, so I created some detailed observation protocols, but those are often grounded in something we already had, which is Sphere's AWARE framework. And AWARE stands for assert, wonder, accept, respect, and establish. And that's because I wanted leaders to have a clear, actionable way to support teachers in identifying practices as well. So each category on, let's say, one of the walkthrough tools includes some specific look fors that both highlight the teacher and student actions, because it's that balance of everything happening in the classroom environment, right? So recognizing components of what's happening of strong discourse in real time. And too often feedback around classroom discussions are really broad or surface level, like get students talking. But the AWARE framework offers a shared structure that leaders and teachers and even students can use to name and identify what's happening in a conversation and where growth is possible. So by using a framework like this, clear look fors, I'm hoping the feedback process can be a bit more focused and meaningful and collaborative. So that way, when leaders and educators and students are aligned in what they're observing and engaging in, then it can open the door to richer reflection and intentional practices. And one simple tip I love to share, which it might seem obvious, but on a look-through tool like this, it is great to have a highlighter or just quickly circle what you're observing because they are laid out as bullet points. And that's a quick visual way to validate what's happening in the moment. And then you compare that with a gentle wondering about something that wasn't observed, just to open the door to reflection. And that should just be a curiosity piece. Like, tell me more about your thoughts on this. It should not be, I did not see this happening, right? It's about partnering. And just like we're trying to tell our students in engaging with civil discourse, saying something like, tell me more, or can you share more about this, just as opening the door to teachers talking about it. Teachers have so much to say about what's happening in their classroom. Very little needs to be asked or said by a leader. So educators and leaders can learn so much from working together in supportive and authentic ways.
I love that. I think that really speaks to the connection piece that you're trying to develop between leaders and teachers, and really valuing the expertise of teachers within the classroom and helping school leaders empower teachers. But I'm also wondering, leaders need to be empowered too. So how do your tools specifically empower leaders? And if a school leader is facing resistance, so they're not feeling very empowered about civil discourse initiatives, what are some ways or what is some advice that you would give them? And then how do your materials support empowering leaders? That's a pretty loaded question.
Yeah. And something I'll point out is leaders, and I will give a shout out. I've had some amazing principals and leaders and mentors and coaches. And I'll just say, I feel that loneliness can be a real issue.
Yeah.
You have principals that they are the only person in their school in that role. And you're thinking, who do they have?
Yeah.
What tools are being given to them? And, we have many schools across the country where they don't have mentors or instructional coaches to support too, or an instructional coach is split across several schools. So we're thinking about these unique challenges, sense of loneliness, needing a community as well, and their own supports and investment into them. So in times where, especially now, hearing constantly that people are feeling stretched really thin, and that includes in leadership roles. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that some of these tools can be an easy to use way to feel like, hey, I have something that I can use the next day with teachers, and that takes a piece of mental load off me. Not only do I have this ready for me, but I also know that by using this tool, I'm supporting my students and teachers and doing something that's supporting our school mission, our culture, and academic skills. So I'll start with that. And then that being said, our leaders, in addition to those challenges, are facing a lot of resistance or skepticism along a lot of on a lot of things right now, right? But specifically civil discourse, when I'm thinking about that, encouraging people to start with small, focused, values-based initiatives and highlighting how civil discourse is supporting those academic skills that we talked about earlier in the content standards. As I mentioned, those can easily be tied together, and you can highlight in your state standards wherever discussions, multiple perspectives, communication skills, speaking and listening are highlighted. That makes it really easy to kind of align those. And then also encourage the use of qualitative and quantitative tools like self-assessments or rubrics to point to growth as well. And those can be self-reported. So like in the middle school toolkit, there's student assessments where students can assess where they feel they're at with these skills. And if, depending on your context, those types of data points work well for you, I encourage leaders to pull those in to show how this is making a difference. As we know, many stakeholders value data. And once people begin to see that positive impact on school culture, especially like increased student voice and participation, we've had many leaders in our network share that that investment leads to the support for civil discourse growing naturally as an embedded piece of their school.
Sarah, as we start to close out this episode, I'm wondering, what is the most unexpected insight you've gained while creating these civil discourse tools for educational leaders?
Yeah, an insight that stands out to me that I feel like is really important to highlight, to give a shout out again to our leadership as well, is that leaders are not necessarily avoiding civil discourse because they don't believe in its value, but because they have barriers or they're also lacking practical entry points when balancing so many other responsibilities. So an insight to me is just thinking about how momentum can shift and can be built from even small steps, like that shared observation tool or using a beginning resource. This really reinforces the need for accessibility and clarity and quick leadership resources to empower them and move them forward in what can be very busy times.
Absolutely. What gives you hope, Sarah, about the future of civil discourse in schools?
Yeah, so much does. It's hard to pick, but a couple of things I think about when this is asked is, one is that educators and leaders are genuinely wanting to create spaces where students are feeling heard, respected, and challenged to think critically. Classrooms are magical places, as we know, and they're all working on investing in those spaces. And then also across different communities, it gives me hope that I've seen a shared desire to build this type of civic culture where students are given the chance to engage in this discourse and the students rise up to that. And the final piece is seeing this happening, whether it be a circle in kindergarten having discussion or a Socratic seminar in high school. I believe in the ability that they're contributing to the foundation of a healthy, resilient democracy in our next generation.
Those are some really hopeful words. Sarah, if school leaders can take just one key message from your toolkit, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, I think it would be that building a culture of civil discourse starts with those small intentional steps that create space for this work. And I believe that educators will be appreciative of having mentors, department chairs, leaders who trust and support them in these contexts.
Definitely. So now that you've given us all this wonderful information about the toolkit, I'm wondering, how can interested school leaders connect with Sphere education initiatives for additional support with either accessing or implementing these tools?
Yeah, so please do look at our website and look at the whole collection. It's easily set up to navigate, but if you have any questions about the resources, please feel free to contact me or use Sphere's Contact Us form on our website. We'd love to hear from you. And I'd also love to share that if you'd like support on a school or district level in implementing civil discourse, Sphere on the Road does great professional development at no cost to you that's flexible and tailored to meet your needs and align to your community's mission and vision. So we'd love to partner and support you in this work that you're doing with staff.
Fantastic. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing all of your excellent thoughts and your expertise. And I want to remind listeners to please check out the show notes for links to leadership materials that we have discussed in today's episode. So, Sarah, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Kobi. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Teacher Sphere. We're honored that you choose to spend your time with us, learning from the experiences of practicing educators and the team members who support them. If you're interested in exploring the curriculum resources and leadership tools we discussed in today's episode, you can find them at sphere-ed.org. Remember to subscribe, and we hope you'll continue engaging in these important conversations about implementing civil discourse resources in today's schools. Our deepest gratitude to our production team, who brings these voices to you, and to our musicians, whose work creates the perfect atmosphere for reflection. Keep listening, keep reflecting, and we'll see you again soon.